Magic 5, smile awkwardly. Get started.
All right, welcome everybody. This is your community meeting for Kubernetes for August 10th, 2017. This is a publicly recorded meeting. We keep an archive on YouTube and we are live streaming live. So thank you to the 5 people who have already shown up to the live stream. We had a demo cancellation last minute, so unfortunately we're not going to have that for this week. So we're going to go right into release updates with Jace.
Hello. Make it quick. 1.8 is rolling right along. Got some great stuff happening there. We're still reviewing the features repo, and that work will continue in conjunction with the SIGs as they will continue to give us some demos and whatnot. So I couldn't resist. Code Winter is coming. Sorry, September 1st. So this is really a big step in the release process. So we want to make sure that the features are mostly feature complete at that point. So please, no, Clayton, it's not, but close. So yeah, just if you could just keep us informed in SIG release about what's going on with your features. If you think that there's a chance that they're going to slip or whatnot. We definitely want to maintain a strong open communication channel for everybody so that we know what's going on. And we're working, as in not me, but Maru has been working on automation for the ending state where we talk about go, no go on things and essentially making sure that the labels are all proper, and if not, that we kick things out so that we can work on getting exceptions or whatever we need to do with the SIG to make sure that features are on track. And that's largely it. I put in 1.7.3 is out. Thanks, Wojtek. 1.6.8 is also out, and thank you, Anthony, patch manager extraordinaire. Just a quick word of thanks. The patch manager job is a long and sometimes arduous and occasionally thankless job. It requires a lot of work, and you basically are on deck for at least 2 releases because of the policy. So if you see the release managers around, please thank them for their hard work, because the patch release is a lot of stuff to do, and it's fantastic that they're doing that. Thank you so much. That's it.
One thing to add there. We're going to send out an email in the next couple of days with a draft of the release notes for SIGs to start filling out. Since we're past feature freeze and code freeze is coming up for September, it's reasonable to start trying to fill that out now. So look for an email sent out to notices.
Alrighty, and if you had a hard time hearing that because of the volume level, basically draft release notes will be pushed out through the normal email channel, so keep an eye out for those. Moving on to the project management section. So we kind of added this after some feedback as to get a little bit more coordination from SIG PM and the other SIGs. Jace and or Ihor, did you want to mention the agenda items here?
Yeah, just a brief update before we'll go towards like the general discussion. So as most of you have noticed, I've sent a message to Kubernetes dev 2 days ago after our SIG PM meeting that has happened on Tuesday regarding the new proposal that we currently have regarding the feature orientation for the release or something like that. So as you should remember, we had 1.6 release at the beginning of the year that has been mentioned as a stabilization release. After that, we had 1.7 that has defined as a non-stabilization release. At Kubernetes Leadership Summit in San Jose, we also have been discussing these policies of releasing Kubernetes. Where do we have like more what kind of release can we name as a stabilization? What kind of release can we name as a non-stabilization? Until this week, we haven't had any defined policy, any defined document, any defined and structured description how should we release Kubernetes in terms of the stabilization and non-stabilization. So at SIG PM, and big kudos to Jason, who has been the primary person to prepare this document, we have this formalized document. We have formalized description, and at this meeting, we're expecting to discuss it with the global community before we proceed with like some like next steps. So we'd like to receive like go signal on this meeting or after the meeting. So probably Jason, you may describe a bit what do we have at the moment?
Yeah, so essentially, as Ihor said, what we're trying to do is come up with, it's not as much a policy proposal as more trying to codify what we're already doing. And interestingly, Brian Grant had put a comment in the document itself, and I'm going to go ahead and paste a link to this document in the chat as well, so people have it. But essentially, that this process of feature focused and then switching to more of a stabilization focus and then feature focus has been in play more or less since version 1.0. So I don't think we're talking about anything new. What we're really trying to drill down is, what does it actually mean and how is it enforced? Because at the end of the day, the release consists of the things that people put in the code. So if nobody decides to do any work on stabilization, then ostensibly it's not a stabilization release. So there's really a twofold question: is how do we define our intent, which is what are we trying to put out, and then how do we go about getting the governance in place to ensure that the release is consistent with what the community has dictated as the desire for the release. So that gets into a whole bee's nest of governance issues that, because the steering committee has not been fully formed yet, we can't really get into. So you'll see a lot of the comments sort of get into that. But I think at a base level, what this document is really trying to accomplish is, what are the basic characteristic differences between that? And what are the differences in terms of the product management, release management, and architecture groups? What are they doing differently per release? What are the activities that might be different? So the document is broken out into just describing what those releases look like. So it starts with feature-oriented releases, saying this is sort of what it is. It talks about what a stability release is. And one of the key takeaways of the stability release is it's not about making a stable Kubernetes release. It is about trying to mature features out or determine if a feature that we would like to promote maybe doesn't have the support in the community or in the SIGs, or maybe it's just something that we thought was a good idea and turned out not to be, and then going through the process of deprecating that. So it's really about just being really mindful about how we steward and shepherd releases through the process. Moving forward, it really talks about some of the other activities that happen during a release. So ideally, if we're in a stabilization period, that might extend to other aspects of the project as a whole. So maybe things like breaking out code into their own repositories, or refactoring code that we all know is maybe not ideal. Things like the cloud provider breakout, some of that stuff would make sense to do during a stabilization release versus maybe a more feature-focused release. And another key differentiator is not necessarily about features per se, that the features are good or bad. It's really about where are we expending our effort. Because what we're seeing is an increasing amount of burnout in a lot of the core contributors who are spending a tremendous amount of time, not only just working on the project code, but also a lot of the minutia around testing and getting things approved. And that burden is getting higher and higher every release. So what we want to try and avoid is burnout. And part of that is directing people's efforts toward the most important thing that they can do with their time, which hopefully, based on this release cadence of alternating feature and stabilization, is focus on this one aspect of the release as much as possible and do what you can in the other regard. So definitely features would be prominent in a stabilization release as well, but that's not the focus. The focus is how do we mature and graduate existing features. So in a nutshell, that's it. At the bottom of the document, it kind of talks about the three
Yeah, one thing we need to do a better job of is communicating more concretely what our goals are for the project. At the Leadership Summit, we talked about increasing the focus on stabilization in general, and just to give a brief recap of that, we are working towards trying to reduce the surface area of what has been called the core in the past, and we're trying to formalize the layers, what has been called the layers proposal in SIG architecture. But we are focused on building extension points like admission control extension and API aggregation and cloud providers, CNI, CSI, and so on in the system to reduce that surface area and make it possible to get more things out of the Kubernetes repository. We're trying to push mature, widely used APIs like the workload APIs such as deployment and daemon set and stateful set and RBAC for authorization policy and things like that, that sometimes requires new features in order to get them to V1 or GA and ensure that we don't need to break backward compatibility of the API in the future. So some of those are adding features in 1.8, but with the goal of getting those to stable by the end of the year. So I think we need to look very carefully at the features that are being developed and the specific efforts underway, and make sure we have overall agreement that these are the right sets of things to be focused on across the project. I realize different SIGs have different priorities. Cluster Lifecycle is trying to do things and whatnot, but yeah, I think where the governance could come in is have a review of whether we're all rowing in the same direction or not. In order to actually stabilize the release and Kubernetes, we are going to need to change not just governance, but how we actually develop code on the project. If you look at other projects such as Node.js, they not only have higher test coverage, which is something we need all the contributors to work on, generally, not just in stabilization releases, but they also have more gates before features hit a release. And moving code to other repos is one mechanism we're going to use to do that, so we can control when code gets vendored back in or when we change what releases from other repos we depend on in the main release. But I think we are going to have to move to doing development in branches as well. If code gets merged into Kubernetes, it's too hard to rip things out the way we used to do leading up to 1.0. So expect those kinds of changes to be coming. 1.8, it's kind of late to make radical changes, but we are working on building some kind of mechanism we can use to track metrics across the project. Get involved in contributor experience if you're interested in that, but we're exploring a couple of alternatives. We've done some work on Velodrome in the past, and that's one of the things we're going to continue looking at. But right now, even just having visibility into what's going on across the entire project is really, really hard.
I would largely agree with that. I think my main point of confusion on this doc is I guess there are a lot of subtleties to what we're trying to say, but it's 5 pages of a wall of text that don't make what is going into a release any simpler or more predictable to me, because it sounds like there's sort of a holy trinity of SIGs down below that have some role in this, plus each individual SIG needs some decision making. So I do like the idea of reframing the problem as one of messaging from the Leadership Summit or from the collective of SIG leads, because I certainly felt like I walked away from the Leadership Summit thinking that we had agreed, we had knowingly taken on technical debt and process debt early on in the project. and that we had knowingly made some poor architectural decisions, and that what we really wanted to focus on was paying down that technical debt to improve the performance and reliability of Kubernetes, and to pay down some of that architectural debt to, clean up those boundaries to make sure that we could facilitate faster development and sort of scale the project out a bit more. And I'm not sure if folks feel like the theme of features or work being done overall is actually headed in that direction or not. But it seems like being able to empower SIGs to make that decision for go, no go is a good first step, because my concern is a lot of the discussion around this seemed to be like, well, sorry, we just can't solve this until the steering committee comes around. And I guarantee the steering committee's reaction is going to be, sorry, we're not going to decide this. We're not the choke point for what goes in and what goes out of a release. We are going to delegate this to the right people to make that decision. So we are the right people today. Somewhere the right people are here. And I'm trying to figure out if we can make that decision today.
I totally agree with that, Aaron. Like, just saying we're going to wait for the steering committee to solve this is just punting the problem, and it will just get punted right back.
Yeah, and I think, Brian, at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, you've nailed this so succinctly in the document, which is there is a schism between the SIG power structure and the code inherent power structure of the owner's files and approvers. So until that gets reconciled, until there's a direct correlation between those things, that we're still going to be in this boat. Because I could spin up SIG Fantastic tomorrow and have zero authority over anything in the project, but then be ostensibly tasked with all the fantastic features being my responsibility. So that's just not a sustainable structure.
I do still feel like holistically there needs to be somebody who can take a look at the set of all features that are going, like what is all the work that's happening for Kubernetes. That problem you just said was really difficult to visualize right now, Brian. It still seems like SIG PM is maybe the closest to that human effort right now. Like, I still feel like somebody needs to have the authority to look at the zeitgeist of the release and say, like, you know what, even though you SIGs are saying it looks like what everything you're doing is in the name of stabilization, that doesn't seem to line up, and we disagree with that. We need to do something about that.
Yeah, and the way I would like this to work is, at least my current mental model, unless it's proven not to work, is, as you said, let this provide top-down guidance to SIGs, but let them make informed decisions. But then clearly the people who are reviewing the contents of the release, which will be multiple horizontal SIGs like SIG release, SIG PM, docs, etc., should all have the power to push back. If the SIG still disagrees, then that's where we need an escalation process to somebody who can make the call. So that's where maybe the steering committee would be relevant. Hopefully that wouldn't be exercised every single release for every feature, because hopefully most people on the project are reasonable, and if reasonable objections are made, they will get resolved. But definitely the steering committee should not be deciding on a feature by feature basis for every release, what goes in the release and what doesn't go in the release. And if we provide people with the right information, I'm hoping they will make the right decision. But we have had cases, for example, where, when it came to people writing the documentation or reviewing documentation changes, that it was exposed that, well, for people who are outside the little bubble of developing this, what you're doing doesn't actually make sense. So we need to revisit that. So having that, and other pairs of eyes on the problem sometimes does help put it into the bigger context. So I feel like there are going to be multiple people who are doing that, and they all need to feel like they can question, whether this should really be happening, and push back.
So I hop in here. I agree with pretty much everything Brian's saying. I think, we need a way to be able to empower SIGs to actually make rational decisions around this. For me, the thing that I'm having trouble with is that we're too squishy in terms of what the definition of a SIG is, who the decision makers are, and how those decisions are made. And I feel like some SIGs are run in a relatively efficient sort of top-down manner. Other SIGs are more of a cooperative type of thing. And I think that the different styles of SIGs meshes differently with our goals out of this. And so I don't know, like pre-steering committee, if we can fix this, but to some degree, having some structure for, how SIGs operate and have that written down and have that be something that everybody can agree on, or at least abide by, I think is a necessary part of moving forward with this stuff.
Yeah, that's where the point that Jace mentioned becomes relevant, reconciling owners and SIG membership. I totally agree that it's really kind of squishy and confusing right now. And in general, the owners do participate in, that is, the reviewers and approvers in the owners files do participate in the SIGs. So for example, in SIG API machinery, the people who attend the SIG and the people who are in the owners files and the people who are writing the code are all pretty much the same people. So there is no misalignment within that SIG, but that may not be the case for all the SIGs. And even if it is the case, that doesn't necessarily mean it's aligned with the overall goals of the project. So yeah, we are missing some structure and decision-making processes.
I
think,
sorry.
Go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
I was just going to second what you said, Joe, because I think you're exactly right that this is such the constant push and pull of this is that we want this to be a community project. We want it to be something that we all decide collaboratively, but at some point there's this lever that can be pulled about how much process or how much authoritarian needs to be exercised to meet our goals. And so I think your proposal specifically, and there's a thread, I don't have a link to it, but basically
just me splatting something out, do not take that as gospel. That was just like total straw man.
No, but I think that the spirit of what you said is, let's let SIGs self-organize as much as is reasonable and responsible, with the caveat that they need to, at the end of the day, come up with some sort of way of shepherding the work that goes into the project in accordance with the overall benefit of the project. I mean, really what we're trying to do is make sure that SIGs are all rallied around what is it that we as a community agree on. And SIGs, you are essentially a structure around a development team, more or less. If we were running this as an enterprise, if this was an enterprise software organization, you'd have the SIGs would essentially be feature teams. And so there's a certain amount of patterning that can happen around feature teams that's well known and expected. So it's like, how do we capture the responsibility of a feature team with the right amount of governance so it doesn't choke people's productivity?
I do want to call against modeling too much against how big companies work, because at the end of the day, stuff gets done when people are willing to pony up and write code and documentation, roll up their sleeves and do work, and we can't do like we can have the feature teams owning the implementation, but we can't do a centralized sort of planning of it's got to be herding cats, on the feature planning thing more than it always ever is, right? So I think we can't import that model too much.
I would actually sort of disagree in the sense that I think that the challenge so far has been that we have given weak mandates and we have had relatively little enforcement, and so we've said things like we want to do stabilization, and everyone else says, yes, we're doing stabilization. And then they throw 20 features into their SIG because they're sure that those features are important, but they hate everybody else's SIG's features, right? And I think that actually a level of top-down is the only way we're going to actually fix these things. So
I think top-down we can say no, but the yes has to come from bottom-up.
Oh, yes, I would agree with that. I think we need to very strongly, but we have to have that message of we're going to act as a filter. And sometimes we're actually going to act as an unfair filter, right? We're going to say, like, you know what? No features this release, period, end of story, sorry. And people will say, but we're all stable, and we have to be willing to stay. Because we've said this before, like when we did a stabilization release, some SIGs were like, look, we're all stable and stuff, so we're going to add some features. And I think we have to admit that, like, we're going to actually disappoint people. And I think we've been historically bad about that.
I think there's also a chunk of this which is peer accountability. I think a lot of people are looking upward for a decider, and we instead need to be holding each other as peers accountable for the agreements that we make as a group.
I think the trouble is the peer relationships tend to be at the SIG level, as opposed to we're big enough that there aren't really peer relationships at the project level.
Or there are fewer,
they just don't exist. Like they just really don't exist.
And this is where we're lacking, the comparison to a company was mentioned. And we have 200 monthly active contributors, and that might just be to Kubernetes. So we're at a scale where a company would have a lot more management infrastructure, project management, people management, and so on. And at this scale, it's just really hard to have visibility in order to audit everything that's going on. So we've talked about favoring automation over process, and that's where I really hope that we can invest more in mechanisms like metrics dashboards or so on, so we can actually tell what's going on. Like I was just browsing the features issues. We have 65 issues tagged with 1.8. I'm pretty sure that the past few releases we had fewer features than that. But having metrics dashboard would make that really clear, and then draw attention to that.
So the other thing to look at in terms of Brian's point about larger organizations and more hierarchy, and to Brendan's point about the peer relationships cross project, that at some level in my mind was in fact the SIG Leads and the SIG Leadership Summit, and that peer group was being built to hold people accountable in that cross-project way. And we have that as a solid peer group, and we have discussions in those groups. So I think there's a way to bolster it more as opposed to saying that it has to be top down. I think we're gonna need both.
Yeah, and even if there's the discussion that was had about whether the SIG leads are deciders, even if they're not deciders, certainly if they do buy into whatever our project-wide goals are, they can pay attention to what's going on and escalate to people who are the deciders.
And they're absolutely influencers in all of this, both to peers and to individual contributors, as well as up to any sort of steering group.
Yeah, I think that we really need to just, I think, say it outright, is that SIG leads should not be invested with more power or more privileges than other people, unless, of course, they're doing the work that would warrant that otherwise. And I think that'll help a lot with this power structure problem, because really leadership is about influencing others and allowing others to do their best work. So what we need to do, if you care about your SIG and your membership, is you need to empower your groups to do their best work. And that means that as a project, we need to agree on what that best work looks like.
Is this time boxed?
George is saying 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, we got about 3 minutes or so until we need to move on. So if
I think the only other thing to think about here is structurally how we do this. Like, I think that one of the reasons that this has worked for things like the Linux kernel is because they actually put that management structure in place in the form of their Git repositories. Right? Like, there's someone who owns networking, who is the lieutenant who owns that and has their Git repo where they slowly merge things in, and then only things out of that Git repo merge into mainline. And that implicitly is a management structure, even though it's not an explicit HR management structure.
Yeah, I think having that choke point is a critical thing, where there is somebody who, even if they're acting on behalf of the community, there is an explicit yes, whereas right now there's no explicit yes along the way. It's kind of a mishmash.
And especially in the code, I feel like, and in the elevation of the code into it's one thing for the SIG to say, yes, this code is good from the SIG's perspective, but we don't have a separate step where we say this code is good for the project's perspective. And that's actually when you do the two-phase commit, or the two different steps of commit, where it's like commit to the storage, whoever owns the storage part of the kernel, and then commit to the main line of the repo. Like, those are two different statements, and it's possible that we should separate those two out. And I know that we're trying to separate projects out, and maybe that will be the way that we achieve this.
Well,
but
I don't think multiple repos is going to be the only solution. I think we also need to employ some kind of branching or forking strategy. I think some combination of those two techniques is going to be the answer, but we have to get development out of the master branch of Kubernetes.
Yeah, no, I think that if we try and turn the master branch into more of a tree, it will help with a lot of this. It's going to be painful, I suspect, but I think that it will help.
Yeah, I think that's the limiting factor, at least as it stands right now, is because once the PR is merged, SIG release, we're going to be at the end of the release, is as a release leader, how do I possibly say this feature shouldn't go? It's going to be
Yeah,
annoying.
I would like to not spend 6 weeks breaking stuff and 6 weeks trying to cobble together a release that actually works.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would second that in terms of the features and in terms of governance and the features. So before and until now, we still don't have any like specific rules. How can we say some person who has already delivered the feature or whose feature is already ready to be submitted and to be delivered in the release just to say no go, despite the fact that we have like had some formal agreements on like on some guidelines for this release and so on. Like we have for the current release that we have initially agreed that this release will be like stabilization release, and our initial agreement that means that we expecting to have more beta and stable features than alpha features. At the same time, as Brian mentioned, we have now 60 open features under the features repo, and most of them are alpha features because most of these features have been already started. Their development process has already been started a few iterations ago, and now they're ready to be delivered. So we have to formalize that as well, and like to have like some specific rules to say go and not go for some features. Aaron?
I wait my time. Let's move on.
All right, moving on. SIG cluster lifecycle. Robert?
Sure. So I can give an update sort of on what we're working on for 1.8. We just went over this at our SIG meeting on Tuesday, so it's pretty fresh in our minds. Sort of along the lines of working toward stabilization, we had a goal of closing about 10% of issues that were labeled kind bug or documentation improvement, which we've actually already hit sort of early in the cycle. It's somewhat balanced by new bugs and documentation issues being opened, but I think we are at least moving in the right direction there. We also had a high priority goal of improving test coverage for KubeAdmin, which we've not made a ton of progress on yet, but we have people, I think 2 people sort of starting to ramp up on this and adding more automated testing for KubeAdmin. So we're again moving the needle there in the right direction. In terms of sort of new things that we're working on, and KubeAdmin in 1.7 did not have a great story for upgrades. And so you can sort of spin this as a new feature or as trying to fix something that didn't work very well before in terms of stabilization, but we're trying to add an upgrade command. So you'd run KubeAdmin upgrade. If you guys are interested to see how that works it's not yet merged, but in the pre-merging form, Lucas gave a great sort of a 15 or 20 minute demo with conversation back and forth on Tuesday. So you guys can go check out that video. And once it merges, I think we'll try to do a similar demonstration in this larger group meeting as well. Along with upgrades, we've also been working a lot on self-hosting. Self-hosting was initially intended to be the mechanism by which we got upgrades to work more smoothly. We've actually figured out that we can do upgrades without self-hosting. So we have sort of a split model going forward where if you create a new 1.8 cluster with KubeAdmin, you will get self-hosting by default. If you upgrade from 1.7 to 1.8, you will stay on the static pod manifest cluster. And when you upgrade from 1.8 to 1.9 during the next release cycle, your static pod cluster will be transitioned automatically to a self-hosting cluster unless you explicitly opt out. So we're trying to take sort of a sort of slower, more moderated approach to how we do upgrades to make it a little bit less painful for users. And I think we've also got a couple of sort of smaller things in the works. Bootstrap tokens have been moved to beta, and we've got more test coverage added for those. And we've also, I guess, lost our representative to the SIG PM group. So I'm stepping in to do that for the 1.8 release cycle. And we've decided that we're going to sort of rotate through different people for each release cycle. So this might be a pattern that other folks want to follow, where we nominate sort of a different person to represent the SIG for each release that goes to the SIG PM meeting. And that way the burden doesn't fall on a single person. And when that person leaves, it's sort of a big shuffle to figure out how to replace them. So if we put an explicit structure in place to rotate every 3 months, I think that'll survive for a lot longer.
Quick question, Robert.
Yep.
Is anyone going to work on add-on management for KubeAdmin in 1.8?
So Justin, at the beginning of the release cycle, signed up to try to get add-on management to alpha by the end of the 1.8 release. So that's one of the alpha features in the features repository. It's not clear. He wasn't at the meeting on Tuesday when we went over updates on our 1.8 progress. So I'm not sure where that is at the moment. We have to check in with him. But I haven't seen any PRs go by.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I guess I could mention we're also starting to work on HA for kubeadmin. That's a much lower priority task. We sort of expect to have designs mostly fleshed out by the end of 1.8, but not a lot of implementation done. So we expect that to land more in the 1.9 cycle. As long as I've got the mic, I'll mention we have a number of sort of breakout groups from Cluster Lifecycle that have formed that have sort of additional meetings during the week. So we have a group that's specifically working on some minutia of kubeadmin, where it's a much more sort of detail-focused meeting. We had one of those yesterday where we were lucky enough to have Clayton and Jordan join us, so to give us some outside perspectives on how we were implementing self-hosting. In particular, we're working on adding a checkpointing feature to Kubelet, so there was a long discussion about that if people are interested. And then we have another breakout group for kubeadmin adoption. So we have a number of installer tools in the ecosystem, and we're trying to start figuring out what it would take to rebase each of those different installer tools on top of kubeadmin and use kubeadmin as a common building block across all of them. So that's another separate meeting. So if people are interested in sort of subtopics of cluster lifecycle, we're starting to have breakout meetings for those as well with their own sets of meeting notes.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Next, Fox, SIG Big Data.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Sound great.
Okay. So I thought we'd need to do a tiny presentation, so I will share my screen. Need something. Yeah. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a little different from the other SIGs. So I thought I'd go over our goals again, because you don't see a lot of people from SIG Big Data in core Kubernetes sending out PRs. So basically what we do is more of taking care of bits that talk to Kubernetes that live in other projects. And this includes like integrations in other big data frameworks, etc. And we also go ahead and suggest like features where we see a need in core Kubernetes. And we'll talk about one of the projects that we started because of that. So the things that we've been working on are Spark, which was started early this year, then Hdfs, Airflow, which is just beginning now, and then Kube Arbitrator, which is a project that is owned by SIG Scheduling, but is meant to address a lot of the shortcomings of Kubernetes today in the resource sharing space. Spark is an engine for large-scale data processing. We have an upstream issue that is filed that tracks all of this work. What we did since the last time we gave an update was 2 new releases. We made announcement upstream. We have people that are actually trying these things out, and thousands of course, and it giving us feedback and so on. So the ongoing focus now is adding a few more features, bringing parity with Yarn and Mesos in this respect, and also upstreaming into the project itself. We're hoping sometime in the next few months. And in Spark 2.3 that is out December of this year, we will have native Kubernetes support. Hdfs is an on-prem solution. Usually it's a file system that people use on commodity hardware. We have a separate repo. What this has right now is a set of charts that we maintain. It works with Kubernetes 1.5, 6, and 7. We did a lot of performance benchmarking and developed a couple of plugins because some notions and some of the assumptions with respect to data locality are kind of broken when you bring them on Kubernetes. And there are ongoing efforts to have better affinity support, node selectors, etc. And we're waiting on the persistent volume, local persistent storage improvements in Kubernetes core to help our lifecycle management there. The Airflow is this, it's a new project. It's a workflow management solution that is pretty popular when it comes to orchestrating data processing applications. Like typically you might take data from source A, transform it in this manner by running it through Spark or Hive, and then do this subsequent action. So this effort is led by Bloomberg and a ton of community members around there. There is an external roadmap. We have consensus from the upstream community to have Kubernetes support live within Airflow itself. So this is fairly new, but we have some ongoing design and development discussions here. And finally, Kube Arbitrator, it is owned by SIG scheduling. It is meant to add some of the features that Yarn has with respect to being able to share a cluster fairly with data processing workloads into Kubernetes. So this is being developed out of core. It was recently championed by Tim Sinclair and incubated by Joe Beta. Yeah. So mostly our involvement here is to go back, give feedback on various things that, because the users of this particular framework are in the big data community. So it's giving feedback and suggesting features that should go into this particular effort. That's all.
All right, any questions for SIG Big Data? All right, great, thank you very much. All right, moving on to the announcements. We only got 3 today. The first is you should have seen the mail to Kubernetes-dev from Tim Hocking talking about the steering committee voting. If your name is not on the list of members in good standing, there's a little form link that you can click on there and you can kind of fill in and why you feel you should be on there. So make sure you check that out. Action might be required or might not be required by you. There was a interesting bug that was filed by Paul about generating a Kubernetes developer guide. And I know a bunch of us has kind of been talking about it. It's one of those things that everyone's like, it would be a nice to have. And he filed the bug at just the right time when everyone was paying attention. And it seems like it's getting a lot of traction and people are starting to commit. So if you want to get involved in this effort, please check out that bug and leave a comment and get a hold of us if you want to help. I'm going to try to tackle that as best as I can when I get back from holiday. And lastly, it's going to be 2 weeks until office hours. Go ahead and follow the link that's going to be on 23 August. It's going to be a live stream answering questions, helping out users, getting started using Kubernetes and advanced questions and all sorts of good stuff. So follow the link for all that information. And with that, do we have any other last announcements or comments from anybody before we finish a little bit early today?
KubeCon Call for Papers closes in 2 weeks per announcement by Dan Korn. Probably we have to highlight it as well.
Yep, that's a good one. So CFP for KubeCon, I want to say August 21st-ish. I think that's right.
That's correct.
Yep, all right. So it's coming up, so make sure you get your papers in. And with that, we'll give everyone back their 15 minutes. Thank you, and we'll see you all next week.
Sorry. One quick question. On the email thread about people who are listed as members of standing, what I don't see is what a definition of a member of standing is. I'm not looking for a super strict formal definition. I'm just looking for somebody who might want to nominate themselves. What kind of
you get to vote?
They want to write. No, I know that's what you get to do, but
the
what?
Definition
that's it.
Is in the document that's linked above. If you go read, there's a Google Doc that's linked and it's defined in there.
It defines what a member of standing is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that defines what a member of standing is and what the standing confers to you. We knew that whatever heuristic we picked for defining the list of members of standing was going to be insufficient. So we just picked a heuristic that we could actually auto-generate, and we said we'd start there. The intention is to be pretty lenient. If people feel like they've been an active contributor and they want to have standing, my default answer is going to be yes. I just want people to tell me that they want standing and why, and we will go and audit that list.
Yes, I completely understand, and I appreciate that.
Like maintainers, approvers, reviewers from the main repo.
Right. It was a first cut. We couldn't take everybody who's ever sent us a PR. So, if you feel like anybody, just spread the word. Right? Anybody who feels like, hey, I'm part of this community, why am I not on that list? Put yourself on the list.
Yeah, that's why I was asking the question. Is I got some of that. I'm just trying to clarify like why they might want to do that. It's my fault for searching for member of standing instead of members of standing or standing in the doc. I didn't find it on my first try. Sorry about that.
Nice. Thanks.
All right, and with that, going once, going twice.
Code freeze September 1st.
Code freeze September 1st. Winter's coming. All right, and with that, we'll see everybody next week. Thank you very much.
Awesome.